Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are digging into a massive story. How did the president of Venezuela end up in U.S. custody? And what could this possibly mean for the future of the Americas?
So, the news just dropped like a bomb, didn't it? U.S. military forces have captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. This happened after a series of direct military strikes right inside Venezuela. Maduro and his wife were taken into U.S. custody, and now he's facing drug charges in New York. I mean, wow.
And right after all that, President Trump announced that the U.S. would essentially be running Venezuela's government for the time being. The official line is that this is just a temporary thing, to restore stability.
Okay, so this is, well, it's unprecedented, and it raises a whole lot of questions. But the biggest one, the one we're really going to unpack here, is this. What's the official reason for doing this? And, maybe more importantly, does that reason actually hold up when you start looking at the facts?
All right, so let's get into it. The White House has built its entire case for this intervention around one really specific and, let's be honest, really powerful idea: a war on drugs, all to protect American lives. The whole justification from the Trump administration really boils down to national security. They're accusing the Maduro government of, well, a lot. They say he's deliberately flooding the U.S. with drugs, that he's creating a migrant crisis by literally emptying his prisons, and that he's basically running a narco-terrorist state. Now, this is where the official story gets a little tricky. The main accusation is all about this group called the Cartel of the Suns. The U.S. has even labeled them a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO. But here's the thing. Analysts say it's not a cartel in the way you might think, like the big ones in Mexico. It's more like a loose network of corrupt officials who are all just cashing in on the drug trade. So that drug trafficking claim, that is the absolute cornerstone of this whole thing. It's the #1 reason given for military action. But what does the data say? Let's actually follow the drugs and see where they lead.
So the administration's whole case really depends on this one idea, that Venezuela is this massive pipeline for drugs flowing into the United States. But did the facts actually back that up? Especially when you look at the U.S.'s own agencies.
And this really highlights a huge disconnect in the official story. On one hand, you have President Trump saying that Venezuelan boats are stacked up with fentanyl, but then you look at what the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, is saying. They report that fentanyl is mostly made in Mexico and comes into the U.S. almost entirely by land. In fact, if you look at the DEA's own big report, the 2025 National Drug Threat Assessment, Venezuela isn't even mentioned as a source country. That's a pretty big difference.
And when you look at cocaine, it's kind of the same story. A DEA report from 2020 shows that almost 3/4, 74% of the cocaine getting to the U.S. comes through the Pacific. Only about 1/4 of it comes through the Caribbean, which is, where Venezuela is. So this data really makes you question why there's such an intense focus on Venezuela as this major player in the drug game.
Okay, so if the drug narrative has some holes, what's the alternative explanation? Let's look at the one that President Maduro himself has been pushing for years. Could this whole thing be about something else entirely? Maduro's story has been pretty consistent all along. He says this whole war on drugs thing is just an excuse. The real goal, he claims, is for the United States to get its hands on Venezuela's oil. And we're not talking about just any oil. We're talking about the largest proven reserves on the planet.
And that narrative, that counter story, got a huge boost from a comment made by President Trump himself. You see, after the U.S. seized a Venezuelan oil tanker, a reporter asked him what would happen to the oil inside. His answer? Well, it definitely added a lot of fuel to the fire about the real motives here.
And this chart really gets to the heart of the whole situation. On one hand, Venezuela is sitting on the world's largest proven oil reserves. We're talking more than Saudi Arabia. But on the other hand, because of years of mismanagement, corruption, and really tough international sanctions, their actual production is just tiny. It was less than 1% of the global total in 2023. So you have this nation with incredible potential wealth that just can't tap into it. Okay, so if the official drug story is a bit shaky and the unofficial oil story is out there, how in the world did we get to a full-blown military intervention? Well, the capture of Maduro didn't just happen overnight. It was really the final step in a year-long campaign of escalating pressure that went from, financial rewards all the way up to open military force. And you can see that escalation pretty clearly right here on this timeline. The year started with the U.S. doubling the reward for Maduro's capture. Then, by September, we saw military strikes on ships at sea. Come October, covert ops inside Venezuela were greenlit. And then in December, a total naval blockade was put on Venezuelan oil. Each step just ratcheted up the tension and brought everyone closer to this final outcome.
And let's be clear, this wasn't some small-scale thing. This escalation was backed by a massive show of force. The U.S. sent 15,000 troops to the region. They sent a whole naval armada, including the USS Gerald Ford. That's the biggest, most powerful aircraft carrier in the world. This was a full-on military mobilization.
So where does that leave us? Well, we have two totally competing stories. You've got the official story, a big counter-drug operation that seems to be contradicted by the administration's own data. And then you have the other story, a grab for the world's biggest oil reserves, which officials deny, but some of their actions seem to point to. And so the whole world is left wondering, what was the real reason for this intervention, and who's ultimately going to pay the price?